People say that Abelard must have gone a bit crazy from studying, gave up his childhood sweetheart to marry a woman he doesn't even like in order to repay a favor. But it gets worse. This woman became pregnant before their marriage. What a turn of events. This is the once promising provincial top scholar and a first-class engineer at the research institute. Everyone says Abelard can't swallow this humiliation. Eileen looked at the handsome man in front of her, who was engrossed in his studies and research, and said coldly, "Admit a boss and get him registered, and then I'll divorce you." "Hello. Could you please connect me to Comrade Abelard from the research engineering department? I'm his family member and need to speak with him urgently," Eileen said, her politeness tinged with urgency. "Please hold for a moment." The voice on the other end was cold, and about a minute later, they said, "Engineer Abelard is busy and cannot respond at the moment." With that, there was a busy signal. Eileen was taken aback and had no choice but to hang up. 4 years ago, after a passionate fling with Abelard, he went to work at the research institute. 2 months later, she became pregnant with a boy, but due to her inability to contact Abelard, she wasn't recognized, and her in-laws kicked her out, forcing her to return to her father's old house. For the past 4 years, the rumors behind her back had never stopped. She could ignore those rumors. After all, she had managed to raise a child on her own through the toughest time. However, she couldn't delay ABBA school registration. She had inquired before and found out that schools definitely wouldn't accept children who weren't registered. After hesitating for a moment, she figured they wouldn't answer if she called back. So she prepared to go home after paying. Just as she took a couple of steps, she overheard the operators behind her whispering, "Every time she comes, her partner never answers the phone. I heard it's because the kid isn't hitched. How thick-skinned can she be, right? I heard she's the daughter of a professor." With all sorts of men coming and going at home, she probably doesn't even know whose child she's carrying. Eileen paused her steps, turned around slowly, and stared directly at the two women. Her gaze sharp. The operators were startled and shrank back, closing their mouth. Eileen shot them a fierce glare before leaving the post office. When she returned to the rundown family housing complex, a boss was awake from his nap, quietly daydreaming under the grapevine. He listened well to Eileen. He wouldn't run around when he saw his mother washed home. The weather was hot, and his fair little face was covered in sweat. The mung bean soup she had left out to cool had also gone warm. She poured herself a bowl and gently asked, "Abba, do you want to drink some mung bean soup to cool off?" Abbas combined the best traits of his parents and was a beautiful child, with long, thick eyelashes framing big, round eyes. He stared intently at the grapevine, completely ignoring her. Eileen didn't say much. He would express his wishes if he wanted a drink. After finishing her bowl of soup, she went back to the kitchen to get a towel and wiped the sweat off her son's face. Looking at her son's obedient little face, Eileen's eyes filled with love and determination. No matter what, she had to get in touch with Abelard as soon as possible. At that moment, Mabel arrived, knocking on the door with excitement. "Eileen, I heard from the leaders at work that Abelard is coming back." Eileen paused for a moment. Then self-deprecatingly smiled. She couldn't even contact her own husband. She heard about his work transfer from someone else. But that was fine. She had just been planning to take a boss to the research institute to find him. So this saved her the trouble. Her expression remained calm. "Got it. Thanks for coming to tell me." Seeing Eileen's attitude, Mabel became anxious. This time he's back. He must explain clearly that a boss is his child. There's so many people talking behind your back. You can't let you and your son continue to suffer like this. Look how introverted a boss is. He doesn't even have a playmate. Mentioning her son finally brought a smile to Eileen's face. A boss isn't introverted. He just loves to think. In fact, she didn't blame Abelard for not coming back. His identity and work were quite special, and back when her father was sent down for political reasons, he had been coerced into marrying her despite knowing he had a childhood sweetheart. She didn't blame her father either. He always tried to give her the best. Abelard had entered her father's tutelage after being the provincial top scholar. He was tall and handsome, standing at 1.80 meters, with long legs, though he came from a rural background. He had a distinguished air about him, and every girl who met him fell for him. He often refused the affections of young girls, claiming he was already engaged, and focused entirely on academic research. However, regarding Abba, Eileen could swallow the grievances she suffered, but she couldn't understand how to comfort her son. He didn't understand anything and was looked at with colored lenses by the neighbors every time they went out. It was true that Abelard was forced to marry her, but he was also an active participant in building a real marital relationship. When she was pregnant with Abba, she had called him multiple times, simply wanting him to prove to his parents that Abbas was his child. Each time, it was that cold operator who replied, saying Abelard was unavailable and then hung up. Eileen couldn't believe it. Didn't he have even a few minutes to return the call? Or maybe he was busy and could call back afterward? But he never did. Her expression darkened. Perhaps Abelard really had no feelings for her. She had heard that his family and his original fiancée, Maggie, were still in close contact over the years, which showed that he had tacitly allowed that. Forget it. As long as Abelard helps Abbas get his birth certificate and register this time, she would never bother him again and would let him be free. Mabel was anxious for her. Eileen, I heard he's coming back for a long time this time. You should develop your feelings well with him, and not waste your good look. She and Eileen had been friends since childhood. Eileen was famously beautiful, and there were countless boys chasing after her, except for Abelard, who was quite oblivious. Eileen knew her friend was looking out for her and smiled gently. Thank you for considering everything for me. I just need him to acknowledge Abbas and legitimize our mother-son relationship, and then let him go. Mabel widened her eyes and exclaimed, Are you crazy? With Professor Shun in this situation, Eileen and her son could still remain safe here. Abelard, as her nominal husband, played a role in that. No matter how much those people excluded or targeted them, they could only do so secretly because Eileen was still officially Abelard's wife. Before Eileen could say anything more, Abbas suddenly ran over, grabbing her hand, his dark eyes flashing as he asked earnestly, But, I've been staring at those grapes for so long. Why haven't they changed at all? Do we have to wait until we're asleep for them to grow secretly? Eileen stroked his head and replied with a gentle smile, Yeah. So, go play with something else for now. After a few more nights, the little grapes will slowly grow. Mabel also liked this child. He had red lips, white teeth, thick eyebrows, and big eyes, and his personality was adorable. She took out a bag of peach crisps from her bag and handed them to Abba. Here, have some. Abbas's big eyes curved in delight. Thank you, Auntie. He took the peach crisps, marched over to the doorstep, took out a piece from inside the bag, and gently took a bite. The fragrant and crispy peach crisps made him squint happily. While he was enjoying his snack, the bag became empty, and Abbas stood up alertly. Colby, holding the bag of peach crisps, provocatively said to Abbas, Abba, you let me have this peach crisp. I'll play with you and I won't call you wild seed anymore. Abbas's little face turned red with anger. I'd not want to play with you. Give me back my peach crisp. He rushed over to snatch it back. But Abbas was a year younger than Colby and was weaker, so it didn't take long for Colby to push him to the ground. Abbas' eyes turned red from the pain, but he gritted his teeth and silently got back up. He looked around, picked up a small stone from the ground, and threw it at Colby's hand that was holding the peach crisp. The peach crisp scattered on the ground, and Colby started to cry out loud. Abbas ran over, crushed the fallen peach crisps with his foot, and quickly picked up the remaining crisps from the bag. Darting back home, Eileen saw him with red-rimmed eyes and dust on his clothes, and she hurriedly squatted down to ask, What happened to Abbas? Abbas lowered his head and whispered, Colby snatched my peach crisp and pushed me. I hit him with a stone and made him cry. He knew Colby's mom would surely come looking for trouble with his mom later. Did he strike first? Eileen asked gently. Abbas nodded. I didn't go out to play. Eileen pulled her son into her arms and hugged him. Well done. Mabel shook her head at this scene, unsure of what to say. You'll head back now. Think carefully about what I said today. If anything comes up, come find me. After Mabel left, Eileen didn't want to dwell on the matter anymore and carried a boss over to the swing beside the grapevine. You can play by yourself for a while. Mommy will go make you some food. Today, we're having braised fish. After saying that, she turned around and took the peach crisp from Abbas's hand, pulling out a piece from inside the bag. You can't eat too many. Here's one for you. Abbas took it and sat on the swing to eat. In the dormitory of the Lincoln Research Bay, Abelard was organizing his belongings. A colleague beside him was also preparing to return, seeing him eager to go home. What's up? Missing your wife? Abelard pressed his lips together and replied lightly. None. He hadn't heard from her in for years. She hadn't replied to any of his letters. Remembering the instructions from his teacher before his passing, Abelard felt a wave of guilt rise in his heart. Let's go. The car is waiting. His colleague patted Abelard on the shoulder. After 10 hours on the road, Abelard finally arrived at the military family dormitory of the Research Institute at 9 in the evening. By this time, most people had already gone to bed, and there were hardly any people left on the road. He wondered if she was already asleep and felt a bit anxious. Yet he quickened his pace. At his home's entrance, he adjusted his blue uniform and knocked on the door. Who is it at this late hour? A man's voice came from inside. Abelard's hand paused mid, and after a moment, the voice sounded somewhat familiar, so he knocked again a couple of times. The lights in the house suddenly turned on, and Abelard heard someone coming to open the door. With a creak, the door was pulled open from inside, and the man who opened it was thrilled to see Abelard. He shouted into the house, Dad, Mom, second brother is back. Abelard is back. At this hour? We thought you wouldn't arrive until tomorrow. His father, Mr. Liu, and his mother, Clara, came out from the room. Abelard felt a little dazed, but his mother Clara rushed over to pull him inside. What are you standing there for? Then she turned to her youngest daughter, who was sluggishly coming out, and said, Your second brother is back. Hurry and make him a bowl of brown sugar steamed egg custard. Half asleep, the youngest daughter of the Liu family yawned and went into the kitchen. Abelard placed the bag from his shoulder on the table, found a chair to sit down, and asked, When did you guys arrive? Where's Eileen? Before he left, his parents were still living in the countryside, and the one living here was Eileen. Clara was quick to inquire about that woman as soon as her son returned. She expressed her dissatisfaction, saying, Why are you calling her so affectionately? That woman moved out 4 years ago. 4 years? Why didn't anyone tell me? Abelard knew she didn't have much affection for him, but he had promised his teacher to take care of her for a lifetime. Clara said with displeasure, You don't even know what this woman has done? Your work is so important. What if it affects your emotions? Abelard thought of Aileen's appearance. She had been taught well by the professor, being both knowledgeable and well-mannered, although she was a city girl. What could she have done? Clara felt that her son had been studying so much that he had lost his common sense. Just look at her seductive appearance. Only you would believe she could be faithful. If it weren't for me thinking about you and coming to see her. Who would have known she was already 2 months pregnant? You brought her back home for a wedding less than half a month ago, and she went to the base the very next day after the wedding. How could she have been pregnant for 2 months? She insists that the child is yours. Isn't this just bullying us country folks? She knew exactly what kind of character her second son had. Besides studying, he was absorbed in research, completely clueless about matters of love and relationships. He was disciplined and would never engage in such behavior before marriage. Abelard felt as if lightning had struck him. His tone anxious. So you all didn't even ask me before sending her away. They had already obtained the marriage certificate in Kyoto over a month before returning to the countryside for the wedding. That night, he had been persuaded to drink a little too much, and when he returned Clara spoke with conviction. So what if we send her away? Who can swallow this humiliation? You have to divorce her this time, no matter what. Abelard's chest heaved with agitation. Where is she? He couldn't bear to think of her being sent away while pregnant, leaving with such a reputation. And the matter with the professor made it impossible for her to stay in familiar circles. Why are you worried about her? When she left, a man came to pick her up. That might have been her lover, Clara said through gritted teeth. At that moment, The egg custard was finished and placed on the table where Abelard was. Clara felt displeased when she thought about her son returning and asking about this woman. Wash up and go to bed. If you don't believe it, you can wait until tomorrow to ask around. Only then did Abelard remember that he hadn't eaten anything all day in the car. You all should disperse. Clara was used to giving orders at home and then instructed her younger son. So you and your brother will share a bed tonight. Baker nodded in response and then turned to go back to his room. Abelard drank the egg custard absentmindedly, casting his gaze around the house. The once cozy and comfortable home that Clara had maintained was now cluttered with various items, and the white lime walls had become mottled. The old black wooden table reeked of rotten grief. His mother remained her usual domineering soul, while everyone else either echoed her or obeyed her. He glanced at his watch. It was 4 a.m. Though he was anxious, there was no way to find her at this hour. He went to Baker's room, where Baker was already lying in bed, snoring loudly, with smelly socks and shoes tossed carelessly to the side. After a whole day in the car, he was extremely tired, but he couldn't sleep at all, his mind filled with thoughts of Eileen. The next morning, as Abelard went out, he was recognized by the early rising neighbors, who greeted him warmly. Engineer Abelard is back. It's been a few years, and you haven't changed at all. You're still so handsome. He's in a technical job. All his work relies on his brain. He doesn't do much heavy lifting. So how could he have changed? Is he going to stay this time? Abelard politely replied, I'm not leaving for now. He responded where he could but smiled when he couldn't. As soon as he left, the neighbors began to gossip behind his back. What a pity for Abelard. His conditions are simply exceptional. What a pity. I heard he's planning to get a divorce this time. Even so, it's a pity. A second marriage can't compare to a first. His teacher is being unreasonable. What kind of person is he to insist on repayment and ruin others? You don't understand. With Abelard's conditions, as soon as he gets a divorce, the families in this complex will be scrambling to get him. Not to mention his looks are exceptional. He's earning a national-level salary. Exactly. He was the provincial top scholar. Just imagine how smart his children will be. That child born by the surname Shen must not be Abelard. I heard he often stares into space and doesn't communicate much. But he's good-looking, with red lips and white teeth. It's said that his eyebrows and eyes do resemble Abelard a bit. You've seen him? I saw him once not long ago. Don't talk nonsense. The Liu family said Eileen was pregnant before marriage. It's clear that her father was in a hurry to find someone to take over. So, damn it. Why would Abelard still feel the need to repay such a person? Abelard had thought all night about where Eileen might be. He decided to visit the professor's old apartment first. After 5 bus stops, he finally arrived at the housing complex where Professor Shun used to live. Even though he hadn't been there in over 4 years, he was familiar with everything. Before he got close, he saw a black Jeep parked at the entrance, and his heart sank. As he walked past the Jeep, he noticed a tall man holding a child, surrounded by a group of people. The child was lying on the man's shoulder, trying to hold back tears with a defiant expression. When the child looked up, he saw Abelard. Their eyes met, and Abelard's mind felt like it had exploded. The child's nose and eyes were just like his own when he was young. Just one glance of Paris, it was an instinctive check, and Barrett was 100% certain that this child was his. He pushed through the crowd and saw Eileen. Her long black hair and royal blue scarf braided into a long ponytail hanging down her back. She wore a simple white round neck shirt paired with a royal blue knee-length skirt, exuding elegance. Her beige high heels accentuated her slender figure. She looked as beautiful as ever, even more so with an added charm. Abelard was just about to call out to her when a sharp voice pierced through the crowd. Abba, come down and apologize to Colby. Abelard froze for a moment, hearing about the Mababas. Meanwhile, Eileen stood her ground, her voice firm and unyielding. It's your Colby who should apologize. He was the one who snatched Tabas's peach crisps first. Colby, tears streaming down his face, denied the accusation. No, I just wanted to be friends with him and asked for a piece of his peach crisp. But he wouldn't share. Instead, he threw them on the ground and stomped on them. Children don't usually lie. But after Colby had gone home earlier and explained the situation to his grandmother, she believed that they were at fault. However, when Colby's mother heard about it that evening, she became furious. In her mind, Eileen and her son should have been humble, eager to please their neighbors. Over something as trivial as a few peach crisps, how dare they stand up to her son? That night, she coached Colby to lie. After all, given the scandal surrounding the Shen family, many were already outraged. As long as her son appeared even slightly in the right, the mother and son duo could be drowned in gossip. When a boss heard Colby's accusation, he immediately turned his little head and retorted loudly, "You're lying." Colby pointed to the ground with conviction. "Where am I lying?" "There's the peach crisp you smashed." Everyone looked where Colby pointed, and indeed, there were crumbled peach crisps scattered on the ground. The crowd began murmuring, "This kid really has no manners. At his age, he's already so unrealized, rather smash the crisps than share with others." Abba's small face turned red with anger. He wanted to refute the claims, but the crowd was overwhelming, and he didn't know which part to challenge first. The man holding him could feel his small body trembling and gently patted his head to comfort him. Eileen remained calm, standing tall amidst the onlookers. Her voice was steady as she said, "Those peach crisps belong to my son. Whether he throws them away or gives them to someone else is entirely his decision. Why don't you ask why my son would rather throw them away than let Colby have them?" "Why?" someone in the crowd asked. "Because Colby not only snatched my son's snack, but he also insulted him by calling him a bastard." Aileen's tone remained composed, but her heart ached as she continued. "So, who really lacks manners here?" Colby's mother hadn't expected Eileen to fight back so confidently. Her tone turned sarcastic, dripping with venom. "Well, the Liu family doesn't even acknowledge him. And look at you, can't even wait for the divorce to bring another man into the house. Are you really in a position to lecture us about manners? At least my Colby comes from a proper family, with a mother and father who teach him right from wrong." She had been ready to insult the man holding a boss too. But when she noticed his refined demeanor, his clothes, the expensive watch on his wrist, and the car parked behind him, she hesitated. Instead, she focused her scorn on Eileen and her son, insinuating that a boss had no father to teach him. Aaron, the man holding a ball, frowned slightly, his grip tightening around the boy. He turned to Colby's mother and said, "Watch your words. Ma'am, you have no evidence to back up your claims about Eileen. Unless, of course, you're implying that everyone besides your own husband is a bastard too. If you keep slandering people, I'll take this to your workplace and have a word with your supervisor." Colby's mother gasped, furious but caught off guard by Aaron's calm and direct response. She spat back, "If a boss isn't a bastard, why did the Liu family throw them out? Everyone here knows it. If there was some misunderstanding, his father would have spoken up by now. Why would you, some random man, need to defend them?" A deep, cold voice suddenly broke through the commotion. "Who said a boss is a bastard? He's my son." The crowd was stunned into silence. Abelard stepped forward, casting a cold glance at Colby's mother. Abelard, Abba's father." Eileen froze at the sound of that familiar voice. She looked up, but all she could see was his back. Everyone in the courtyard had heard of Abelard, though few had actually seen him in person. He was the province's top scholar, a lead engineer in a national research project. Now, with him openly declaring a boss as his child, no one dared question it. As the crowd quieted down, Abelard reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of white rabbit milk candies. He crouched down in front of Colby, speaking in a gentle tone. "Colby, if you tell the truth, I'll make sure my aunt doesn't hold you responsible, and I'll even give you these candies." At just 4 years old, Colby couldn't resist such an offer. Gazing at the kind, handsome man in front of him, he admitted, "I took Abba's peach crisp, and I called him names." The crowd erupted once more. Abelard placed the candies in Colby's hand. He had bought the treat, along with a small toy, as a gift for a boss on the way here. Colby took the candy, but sensing his mother's furious glare, he quickly ran off and disappeared into the crowd. Goodness, Colby is already learning to lie at such a young age. It's clear the adults put him up to it. This is just too much. I didn't think a boss was really Abelard's child. The Liu family went too far, throwing the wife out while the son was away and using such a cruel excuse to justify it. Unbelievable. This is the first time I've seen Abelard in person. Gosh, he really is handsome. Features. Those eyes. It's no wonder a boss looks like him. Everything had happened so quickly that Colby's mother didn't have time to react before her son had already exposed her lie. Her face flushed with embarrassment, and she forced a laugh as she turned to Eileen. I didn't realize the little rascal was lying. Just wait until I get home and discipline him. Without waiting for a response, she turned and hurried away, leaving the crowd's curious eyes focused on Abelard. Abelard turned, and Eileen could see him clearly for the first time. His blue work uniform highlighted his tall, lean figure. His features still as striking as they had been years ago. Meanwhile, Eileen had matured since their last meeting. Her once soft face now more defined, her beauty even more refined. She looked at him, her large dark eyes widening for a moment before her expression settled back into calmness. The wind too sold the loose strands of hair framing Eileen's face, one of which brushed against her full red lips. Come in and talk. The man holding a boss looked surprised for a moment before setting a boss down. He said to Eileen, You to talk first. They'll take my leave. Then he told the boss, Uncle Dave will come to see you again next time. Eileen nodded, and the boss obediently waved goodbye to the man. A boss glanced at Abelard, feeling a sense of familiarity and intelligence in this uncle, who had made Colby admit his mistakes right away. However, when his mother saw Abelard, she didn't seem very happy. She only gave him a fleeting smile before rushing to Eileen's side to hold her hand. Once inside, Eileen gestured for Abelard to sit down and then turned to head to the backyard. Abelard awkwardly sat on a clean wooden chair painted white. Looking up, he noticed that the living room had changed from when the professor was there. The once simple and quiet space now felt warm and elegant. A light green BV cabinet held a 14-inch black and white television. A blue and white checkered tablecloth adorned the coffee table, topped with a transparent glass vase containing a cluster of light blue hydrangeas. The white dining table was spotless, and sunlight streamed in through the window, creating a tranquil and comfortable atmosphere. Seeing this, he felt a bit better. Thankfully, her life had been okay these past few years. When Eileen returned, she was holding a cup of water and handed it to Abelard. We're out of tea. Make do with this. Abelard reached out to take it. Thank you. Eileen probably guessed his intentions. After hesitating for a moment, she spoke. I apologize for my dad's decision back then. We were selfish. Thank you for acknowledging a boss today. Her tone was light, even gentle, yet it carried a sense of distance and indifference. Abelard remembered that she hadn't been like this that night. He had even felt that she liked him. Eileen, I should be the one apologizing. From the first moment I saw a boss, I knew he was my child. I'm sorry for the hardships you've faced over the years, Abelard said, his heart trembling as he spoke. Eileen lowered her eyelashes and paused for a while before replying. It's all in the past. She and Abelard indeed had little to say to each other. In the past, when he visited her home, he was either eating or engaged in serious academic discussions with her father, rarely exchanging words with her. The atmosphere grew awkward, and finally, Abelard broke the silence. I apologize on behalf of my parent. Once my work is settled, I will have them return, and you and a boss can move back in. I will never let such things happen again. He fully understood Eileen's attitude. He felt guilty towards her. Eileen had gone through various humiliations. All her pride and self-esteem shattered, and her emotions had long been dull. Actually, this is fine now. We're even with each other. So let's just let each other go from now on. A boss is about to start kindergarten. Once his household registration is sorted, we can get a divorce. Her tone was calm, even carrying a hint of negotiation. When Abelard heard this, it felt like a stone was pressing down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. He looked at a boss who was peeking at him from behind the door. He thought, this uncle seemed so familiar and intelligent to a boss. Yet his mother didn't seem happy, only sneaking a smile before rushing to her side and holding her hand. Abelard felt a sudden urge and blurted out. Let's put a boss on my household registration. He can attend the university kindergarten for free. Eileen smiled gently, yet her tone was firm. A boss will take my surname. Abelard fell silent. He truly didn't have the right to ask a boss to take his surname. He had never taken care of him for a single day and hadn't even known of his birth. He simply nodded and said, "All right, but I can't agree to the divorce." Eileen was taken aback and then heard him say, "I promised the professor I would take good care of you." Eileen let out a self-deprecating smile, knowing this would be the case. She just held a glimmer of hope. Now her gaze dropped, and her tone was calm. "I can take care of myself and a boss? We don't have any feelings for each other, so you don't need to force yourself." Abelard's gaze dimmed, and he rubbed his hands on his knees. "There's no need to force anything. If you really don't want to be with me anymore, let's discuss this matter when you find someone suitable. Okay?" Eileen didn't want to drag it out. Whether she found someone suitable was not up to him. She agreed decisively. "If you have free time one day, come by with a certificate so I can sort out Abba's household registration." Abelard nodded, glanced at Abba, placed the teacup back on the table, and walked over to squat down in front of Abba. Just as he was about to speak, Abba shot him a glare and hid behind Eileen. He was indeed his father, a bad man who had abandoned him and his mother for 4 years. Yet Abba had just started to like him. Abelard was stunned for a moment and then stood up, saying to Abba, "He'll come to see you next time." Abba hesitated for a moment, glancing at Eileen but did not respond. Abelard sighed softly, finally explaining to Eileen, "I'm starting my job tomorrow, so only have time to come in the afternoon." Abelard took a small robot out of his pocket and walked in front of Abba. "Daddy prepared a toy for you. Do you want to come and take a look?" Abba's dark pupils flickered, clutching Eileen's hand, not moving or speaking. Abelard was angry. He placed the toy on the table and said to Abba, "He'll come to see you tomorrow." Only after Abelard left did Abba loosen his grip on Eileen's hand and cautiously say, "He'll just look. I won't play." Eileen patted her son's head and said, "If you want to play, just go ahead." Abelard returned to the housing complex feeling dejected. Just as he reached the door, he heard bursts of laughter coming from inside the house. As soon as he entered, all eyes fell on him. He saw Maggie sitting in the middle, surrounded by family, and he nodded slightly at her to greet her. Clara saw Abelard sitting there like a fool, not responding at all. She pulled him aside and said, "Where have you been all morning? Maggie has been waiting forever for you. Come sit down." Maggie smiled and replied, "Auntie, I came specifically to see you." Clara frowned. "At my age, what's there to see? You and Abelard both come from the same village. Although you didn't attend the same university, you both ended up in the same workplace and are now back together. Isn't that a destined match?" Though Abelard was particularly sensitive to matters of romance and was somewhat oblivious, he sensed that Clara's words were a bit too much. He replied seriously, "Mom, you can't say things like that. It could ruin Maggie's reputation." Maggie quickly interjected, "Abelard, Auntie was just joking. I don't mind at all." Abelard didn't respond further and was about to enter the room when Clara stopped him again. "You finally came back. And you won't even sit down and chat with your mom? That's really inconsiderate." Abelard casually found a chair to sit down, his expression serious. "What do you want to talk about?" He was in a good mood. "Did you go out early this morning to find that girl?" Clara asked, her words prompting Maggie to sit up straight. "All ears." Abelard replied blandly, "I found her." Clara continued, "How did your conversation go?" "A boss is my child. Once I prepare the necessary documents for his registration, he'll bring him and his mother over." The words sounded like a thunderclap in everyone's ears, especially for Maggie, who had heard he was going to file for divorce. How could it have come to this? She glanced incredulously at Clara. Clara panicked a bit. "Have you lost your mind? I know Professor Shen has done a lot for you, but you've repaid him. Getting involved again isn't worth it. No wonder people often criticize book-smart individuals for being so naughty. It really was a bit foolish." "What have I repaid?" Abelard suddenly asked, his voice low. Thinking of how his mother had sent his wife away while he was gone, he felt an urge to demand she leave immediately. Claire was taken aback before replying. She weren't relying on your reputation. Could she still be living so comfortably in this place? Seeing his mother show no remorse towards Eileen, disappointment flashed across Abelard's face. He then entered the room, leaving Maggie feeling awkward and unable to process the situation. Would Abelard's attitude toward Eileen affect her in any way? But soon, she shook her head in denial. Having grown up alongside him and gone to school together, she knew his character well. He was the type who was academically focused and utterly clueless about romance. Maggie recalled how girls had often shown interest in him in high school, which annoyed him to no end. She had suggested he tell them he had a girlfriend, a childhood friend, and even offered to play that role. Abelard had taken her advice, and when he noticed the positive effect, he had come back to thank her. Maggie was foolish enough to think Abelard had developed feelings for her. If she dared to disturb him, he would be just as annoyed as with anyone else. Initially worried that he might have different thoughts once he went to university, she soon discovered he was still using the same excuse. One day, she could no longer help herself and hinted at him. What kind of person do you think you'll marry in the future? Abelard's response was something she would always remember as long as they're normal in all aspects. Have you thought about when you might get married? With someone like Abelard, she felt she had a good chance since he had shared the most with her compared to any other girl he had interacted with. No one expected that just a short while after graduation, Eileen would swoop in and take him, although it hurt her. She found some solace in knowing that Abelard was marrying her out of love. But today, seeing Abelard defend a woman for the first time made her feel a pang in her heart. Feeling a bit flustered, she quickly stood up and said, "Auntie, I just remembered I have something to attend to at home. He'll be leaving now." "All right. Take care, and come back next time." Once Maggie left, Clara began sorting through the things she had just brought over: a can of milk powder and a bag of red dates. Seeing these items eased the slight annoyance Abelard had stirred in her earlier. As soon as Maggie exited, the expression on her face fell, and she felt a wave of frustration wash over her. She decided to stop by the department store to browse and lift her spirit. Recently, she had taken a liking to some new styles in the clothing section on the second floor and planned to try them on before buying them after her next paycheck. As she arrived on the second floor of the department store, she spotted a familiar figure. "Miss Shen, your taste is excellent. 3 outfits you just tried on have been popular with many people this year," the attendant enthusiastically informed her. Looking at Eileen, it was obvious she was a regular there. Eileen looked at her reflection in the mirror, nodding in satisfaction. Seeing this, the attendant's eyes lit up, and she approached with enthusiasm, asking, "Miss Shen, are you considering getting this outfit you're wearing?" Eileen didn't make an immediate decision but asked, "What are the prices for these 3 outfits?" "The one you're wearing is a bit more expensive, priced at $75. The other 2 are $72 and $68 respectively," the attendant explained cheerfully. Each outfit was cheap, and Maggie stepped closer, curious about which one Eileen would choose. To her surprise, Eileen smiled and said, "Wrap them all up for me." The attendant didn't seem surprised at all and quickly turned to get a bag to package them. Maggie's footsteps instantly froze, and a surge of unnameable anger welled up inside her. After all, Abelard usually wouldn't even change his clothes if they had faded and worn out, but this woman had no hesitation in buying such expensive outfits all at once. Abelard earned a basic salary of $450 a month, leaving only $20 for himself, with the rest being sent back without fail. Eileen paid for the clothes, received them from the sales clerk, and smiled at a boss, who was sitting quietly nearby enjoying his lollipop. "All right, now it's time to buy something for a boss." Upon hearing his mother's voice, a boss finally sighed in relief, quickly sliding off the chair and running over to take Eileen's hand. Just as the mother and son were about to leave, they were stopped. Eileen glanced at Maggie, nodded slightly, and tried to pass by with the boss. Maggie, Abelard's childhood friend, was someone she had seen numerous times, and she got along harmoniously with Abelard's family. It was said that they were inseparable in high school, and by college, Abelard had even publicly declared their relationship to everyone. but she had never told anyone about her marriage to Abelard. Otherwise, the Liu family wouldn't have publicly stated that she had a child out of wedlock just because a boss was born 2 months earlier. Eileen, during Abelard's time at the base, he never spent more than $20 a month. Maggie said, her voice neither too loud nor too soft, containing hidden reproach that landed squarely in everyone's ears. Eileen understood exactly what she was implying. The intent behind those words was clear, as if she was placing herself in the role of the mistress. Shen King understood her frustration, but Abelard hadn't divorced her yet, so on what grounds was she questioning her? What does this have to do with you? Upon hearing that, Maggie was momentarily speechless, not knowing how to respond. Then she heard Eileen say, if you're concerned about him, you could subsidize some of his expenses with your salary. I've no objections. After saying this, Eileen took a bus and walked away without looking back. She found it amusing. Aside from the $300 he left her 4 years ago when he first went to the base, she had never taken a single cent of his salary again. So why should Abelard's monthly expenditure of $20 concern her? A boss glanced at Eileen. Is mommy unhappy? No. Let's go pick out your favorite Rubik's Cube. With that, she took her son straight to the toy section on the first floor of the mall. A boss chose the highest level of Rubik's Cube, and the sales clerk smiled at him, noticing how handsome he was and couldn't help but tease him. Little guy, this is for kids over 8. Do you know how to solve it? A boss grinned, revealing 2 little tiger teeth. Then can you let me try? If I can solve it in a minute, can you give me a discount? The sales clerk was taken aback. This little clever boy was clearly trying to bargain with her, and he probably knew how to solve it. So she shook her head, saying, the price isn't something I can decide, but I can help you choose the prettiest one. A boss fluttered his long eyelashes and frowned slightly, saying reluctantly, all right then. The sales clerk was instantly charmed by his little expression and turned to Eileen. How old is he? And he's already thinking about saving money for you? Eileen maintained a smile and quietly asked, how much is it? $8. After they finished shopping, the mother and son also picked out some fruit and biscuit. Today, I'll take you to Aunt King's house for a visit. Mabel had told Eileen that she was taking a day off today. Abis obediently nodded. Thus, Eileen held Abba's hand and walked all the way to Mabel's door. Hearing someone knock, Mabel quickly opened the door and enthusiastically greeted them. Come in. Come in. I knew you were coming today, so I asked my mom to make pork soup. Eileen handed the fruits and biscuits she had just bought to Mabel and entered with a bow. Mabel welcomed the two and had them sit on the sofa. She then turned around to peel an apple for a boss before sitting down next to Eileen to ask, did Abelard come to see you yesterday? How was his attitude towards you? Eileen smiled. He acknowledged the boss and was very polite to me. When Mabel heard the word polite, she couldn't help but furrow her brows and said, then you should take the initiative. I believe that if you're a little more attentive, no man can resist. After saying this, she noticed Eileen's face filled with amusement and curiously asked, what do you mean by that? Did I say something wrong? Do you think Abelard is an average man? Eileen didn't have the confidence to please or change someone. Though they hadn't interacted much, she knew that Abelard was genuinely difficult to deal with. Aside from that night, she hadn't seen any emotional fluctuations from him once he had made a decision. This was true in academics and research, and it was also true in emotions. He had long decided on Maggie. Even though she had been so enthusiastic that night, he would revert to his original attitude afterward. Of course he's not. Professor Shen wouldn't entrust you to an average man. But you're not an average woman either, Mabel replied. Eileen nodded. I brought up the divorce with him. Upon hearing this, Mabel jumped up from the sofa in shock. Are you crazy? If you really divorce him, those people won't just gossip and ostracize you behind your back. There might even be people coming up with bad intention. What will you do then? Eileen had indeed considered this problem. That's why I came to talk to you. What do you mean? After I get Abba's household registration sorted, I plan to take him to Pengyang. It's a pioneering experimental area for reform and opening up, where talents in various industries are flocking in. Maybe I can find a private lawyer to help vindicate my father. In Kyoto, No one is willing to help me, especially those relatives. It's simpler to just spend money. Mabel looked at her in surprise. You still want to go back on this? Eileen nodded. Yeah, but you're going to a place where you know no one. They're all strangers. What will you do if something happened? Mabel worried for her. Eileen reached out and pulled her down to sit. Isn't it better that they're all strangers? Besides, I planned this early on. This decision isn't a spur of the moment. Well, that's such a shame. Mabel still couldn't believe it. Eileen's clear eyes were filled with calm. What's so shameful? How many people dream of marrying Abelard? Eileen smiled and said, Yeah, I used to think that way too. But now I understand that everything about him has nothing to do with me. Even if I married him, I would still have to face everything alone. And often I wouldn't even see anyone at all. The only benefit is that his status does provide some protection for his mother and son. So I don't resent him for anything else. Mabel took a deep breath. What did he say? Divorce? Eileen shook her head. Not divorce? Eileen shook her head again. You would never guess. Mabel couldn't help herself anymore. Just tell me. Eileen spoke with mixed emotions. He said he would discuss divorce once I find my next partner. Should she call him a good person or a jerk? Mabel couldn't hold back and sputtered out the tea she had just sipped. Although this was a serious matter, she couldn't help but laugh. After a while, she calmed down and objectively commented. He's quite principled. He truly lives up to Professor Shen's trust. Of course, saying this meant there is no love involved. A normal man wouldn't say such things to his wife. Seeing Eileen's complex expression, Mabel quickly changed the subject. What do you want me to help with? Eileen stroked her son's head. I want to apply for a border pass to Peng City, and I'd like your dad to help. Currently, obtaining a border pass for Peng City required approval from the neighborhood committee, verification from the police station, and processing by the Public Security Bureau. Mabel's father was the director of the neighborhood committee there. At that moment, Aunt Cheng came out with a bunch of grapes and set them on the small table in front of the sofa. She had just overheard Eileen's words and immediately objected. Abelard just came back. With his status, he's quite popular at work. After enduring so much hardship, why would you want to go to Peng City now? What are you thinking? Aunt Cheng had always treated Eileen like her own daughter, and especially after what had happened, she felt even more pity for her. After speaking, seeing Eileen look a bit down, Aunt Cheng continued. Don't think about those messy things. Things will get better in the future. As long as Abelard acknowledges Ping An, those rumors will quickly fade. Right now, the most important thing is to keep Abelard by your side. Eileen said. I can't let my dad suffer for nothing in this lifetime. Besides, she had no confidence in keeping Abelard close to her. He had his childhood sweetheart in his heart. In Aunt Cheng's generation's thinking, it didn't matter who Abelard loved. What was important was who he was married to and whether he could bring benefits to this family. After hearing this, Aunt Cheng felt heavy-hearted and after a long pause said, This matter is in the past. We've dealt with your dad for a lifetime and know he's not that kind of person. I believe he would understand and wouldn't blame you. Eileen knew that continuing this conversation with Aunt Cheng wouldn't yield any result. So she decided to stay silent. Once she got Abba's registration sorted out, it shouldn't be too difficult to win Mabel over. Thinking about the soup in the kitchen, Aunt Cheng didn't dare talk any longer and quickly said, Dinner is almost ready. There's the braised fish that a boss loves. Let's eat. After Aunt Cheng left, Mabel continued to persuade her. Eileen, what my mom said isn't without reason. You should think it over carefully. Eileen smiled and nodded. After dinner at the Cheng household, Eileen took her clothes and held Dabba's hand to head home. The sky gradually darkened, and the cool evening breeze blew away the heat of the day, seemingly dispersing some of Eileen's inner turmoil. She looked up at the half-moon faintly visible in the sky, recalling how her father had held her hand countless times walking down this path, telling her different story. A boss noticed Eileen slowing her pace, raised his little face, blinking his eyes at his mother, and shook her hand. Mommy, do you want to tell a boss's story? Eileen returned to her thoughts, smiling gently. Yeah, how about I tell you the story of Thumbelin? Okay? Once upon a time, as Eileen told the story, a boss occasionally asked questions about parts he didn't understand. When Abelard finished work, he arrived to find the Shen family's door closed. He sat on a stone stool in front of the house, waiting for a long time. When he looked again, he saw a tall, slender woman in a blue dress, gently telling a child beside her something. The child occasionally looked up to reply, laughing happily. The moonlight was faint, but he could clearly feel the cozy and warm scene between the mother and son. It seemed they were living happily without him. Abelard couldn't quite tell whether he felt disappointed or relieved. As the sound drew closer, Abelard stood up awkwardly. A boss noticed him at once and stopped, holding his mother's hand. Whispering, "Siri, he's here." Eileen gently patted Abba's head, walked closer to Abelard. "And? You're here?" Abelard nodded. "Yeah." Eileen took Abba's hand and moved forward to open the door. Once the door opened, Abelard followed her inside. He sat down in the same white wooden chair he had occupied the first time he came. "I've written the proof. I heard that the words on the birth certificate need to be signed and stamped at the hospital with the ID card." "Yeah? Let's go this weekend," Eileen replied. At that time, only Abelard needed to write a letter of proof, have his supervisor sign it, and mail it to the hospital to complete the process. But the Liu family insisted that the baby in her belly was a bastard. They called Abelard but received no response, which ultimately led to a boss being unable to get a household registration. "Okay," Abelard replied, his gaze landing on the clothes and toys scattered on the sofa from the bag. The clothes still had tags on them, clearly indicating they were newly bought today. And not just one outfit had bought so many. Did she still have any money left? As he pondered, he rummaged through his pocket, pulled out an envelope, and handed it to Eileen. "This is my salary for today, $350 inside." He had given $80 to Clara and her husband for their retirement, leaving himself with only $20. Eileen was momentarily surprised but quickly reached out to take it. "Okay," since he acknowledged that a boss was his child. Supporting the child was only right. She glanced at the man in front of her, still in the blue work uniform and wearing army green liberation shoes. He certainly dressed simply. His childhood friend knew him well. Abelard looked again at a boss, who was well taken care of. It was evident he was raised well. Clothes the boss wore were ones he had never seen before for children. Indeed, very few children around here dressed like that. He had on a white t-shirt paired with loose black and white checkered three-quarter pants, resembling a little actor on television. Abelard pulled out a bag of candy from his pocket and said to a boss, "Come here." A boss looked at the bag of milk candy, his pretty eyes flickering. But he didn't move. Eileen thought about the salary Abelard had just given. In the end, she said nothing. This was his son. A boss turned and left the living room, heading to the kitchen to make himself a cup of tea. After hesitating for a moment, a boss took a few steps forward, puffed up his cheek, and huffed. "I don't want your candy." He knew he was his dad, but he'd only come to recognize him now and had made his mom suffer so much. Abelard was angry. He placed the candy on the sofa and picked up the Rubik's Cube that had scattered out of the bag. After playing with it for a moment in his hand, Abba's eyes widened. In the past, he could only categorize the various colors on one side and considered that a success. But this man could actually unify the colors on the outside while enclosing the center color, completing it in just 4 moves. The speed of his movements left a boss stunned. Seeing the expression on Abba's face, the man smiled and asked, "Do you want Dad to teach you?" A boss quickly nodded but then shook his head again. "No need. Mom said I'm the smartest." Abelard nodded and placed the Rubik's Cube in Abba's hands. "Then you can try it today. And I'll come back to teach you tomorrow." With that, he got up and headed to the backyard, where he saw Eileen sitting in a reclining chair by the grape trellis, sipping a cup of tea. Upon seeing the man approach, Eileen quickly stood up and asked calmly, "Is there something you need?" Abelard pressed his lips together. "I'm leaving it. I just came to say hello." "All right. Be careful on your way back," Eileen replied politely. Hearing her concern, Abelard's heart stirred. Was she really worried about him? After a moment of silence, he said, "You'll come back to see your boss tomorrow." "Okay. But don't buy him too much candy. It's bad for his teeth." After a pause, she added. You can buy some fruit. He likes bananas. Abelard nodded, thinking about how she hoped a boss would accept him sooner. He was grateful that Eileen didn't vent her anger about her parents forcing her out of the house on him by using their child to retaliate. As Abelard was about to leave, he glanced back at his son sitting on the sofa, focused on the Rubik's Cube. His footsteps hesitated for a moment, but he ultimately chose not to interrupt. As he stepped out, he felt quite happy. Upon reaching the bus stop and boarding the bus, he suddenly didn't want to go home. Thinking about the situation at home, he got off the bus and headed straight to Dennis' house. Dennis was Abelard's colleague. Even before Abelard had gone to Lincoln, they had gotten along well, and this time Dennis had warmly invited him over. When Abelard arrived at Dennis' door, he knocked, and the door swung open. Dennis was delighted to see Abelard. He quickly welcomed him inside, apologizing. Sorry? My place is a mess right now. He then found a chair for him to sit down. After Abelard sat down, he glanced around the room. A long rope had been tied up, with children's diapers hung all over it. Dennis' apartment was smaller than Abelard, only about 50 square meters. The living room was already small, and now it felt even more cramped. It's fine. Did your wife give birth? Abelard asked. Dennis gestured. My wife and the baby just fell asleep. Then, looking quite pleased, he continued. If you'd come back half a month earlier, you could have joined us for the baby's full month celebration. He then got up to pour Abelard a glass of water. Abelard apologized. I'll make up for the red envelope next time. Dennis smiled. For engineer Abelard to come see my daughter is good enough. Forget the red envelope. Come and see the baby. Abelard felt a bit guilty as he looked at his empty hands. He took a sip of tea and asked, Is there anyone else in your family besides you? Your wife? And the baby? Dennis shook his head vigorously. I was just scolded by the boss yesterday. If there were anyone else to help with the baby, I wouldn't be so exhausted. Is it that tiring to take care of a baby? Dennis nodded. Of course, ever since she was born. My wife and I haven't had a good night's sleep. This is the first time we just fallen asleep. Abelard took another sip of water, stood up, and said, Then you should rest early. He'll take my leave. Dennis grabbed him. You must have something going on. I was planning to stay at your place for a night, but it seems inconvenient, Abelard stated straightforwardly. Dennis laughed. I knew you had something going on. We have a spare room at home. If you don't mind the noise, you can stay for a night since you're here. With that, he led Abelard to another room. The room was small but clean and tidy. Abelard thought of the room at home that Baker had made smell terrible and sat down, saying gratefully to Dennis. Dennis frowned. After working for so long, you're still so rigid in your speech and actions. It weren't for your looks and job. What girl would like you? Abelard was confused. Why would I want a girl to like me? Dennis was taken aback. You're divorced. You're not planning to stay single, are you? Who said I was getting a divorce? Your mom said so. Everyone in the compound knows. Hearing Abelard say he was getting a divorce, Dennis perked up. I've seen the child your wife is holding one. To be honest, if I hadn't known she got pregnant before marriage, I would have thought that was your child. Abelard took a deep breath. That is my child. A few months before we had a wedding in the countryside, I reported our marriage to the organization, got the marriage certificate, and add to tables of guests under the professor's witness. The wedding in the countryside was held later. Dennis' eyes widened. Didn't your parents know? I didn't think she could get pregnant right away, Abelard said, frustrated. Dennis was momentarily speechless after hearing this, then sighed. You're really a mess. You have no idea how much she has suffered because of your careless words. Honestly, although it's unfair for Professor Shen to treat you this way, Eileen is truly Abelard explained. I'm not blaming Professor Shen. It was my negligence and toughlessness that harmed Eileen. Dennis patted his shoulder. Take good care of her. Just then, the child suddenly started crying. Dennis quickly said, Okay, I need to go tend to the baby. Abelard sat there dazed, listening to the child's cry, Dennis' gentle soothing, and his wife's complaints while changing diapers. After a while, it quieted down, but in half an hour, it started again. Abelard's mood became increasingly restless. Was Eileen like this when a boss was born? Did anyone care for her? She was only 20 at that time. Completely inexperienced. She must have been flustered. Abelard's heart ached. He had failed to live up to the professor's expectations and had caused her so much suffering. Early the next morning, Dennis got up to go to work. And Abelard also got up, feeling a bit dazed from the noise, even if he hadn't cared for the child. Dennis casually boiled a few eggs, gave it to Abelard for breakfast, and they headed off to work together. In the afternoon, when Abelard got home from work, he planned to look for his ID card, just in time to run into Baker. Second brother. Why didn't you come back to sleep last night? Did that woman keep you? Clara overheard and immediately walked out from the living room. Abelard, don't be foolish. This woman is ungrateful. You've been back for so many days. Has she come to see us even one? You must get a divorce. Yeah. Second brother. Don't be fooled by her looks. She's shameless. If I hadn't beaten her up last time, she wouldn't have planned to move out. Baker said this without noticing Abelard's change in expression until he looked up and saw the murderous glare in his eye. Before Baker could react, Abelard grabbed him by the collar and slammed him against the wall. Second brother, before he could finish, a heavy punch landed on his head, followed by another. Clara was horrified. Abelard? Stop. But Abelard cowled and heard Clara's voice. He drove a knee into Baker's abdomen, causing him to bleed from his nose. Abelard was tall and strong. Although he usually just used a pen, he was a fierce fighter since childhood. No one in the village dared to provoke him, and Baker had no power to fight back. Clara, in a panic, called for Old Man Lou and Dominic, and the three of them worked together to pull Abelard away. Gasping for breath, Abelard looked at everything in front of him, his eyes still filled with resentment. Baker lay on the ground, curled up, while Clara and Old Man Lou helped him up. Abelard, are you crazy? What kind of nonsense has that family filled your head with? You beat your brother up like this, and don't even respect your mother's words. I'm going to report this to your leader. Old Man Lou sternly warned Abelard. Wipe his forehead, and didn't say another word. He went into the room where Baker usually slept and slammed the door shut. When he opened his bag to look for his ID, he discovered that his belongings had been rummaged through. The spare change was completely gone. But thankfully the letter and withdrawal slip were still there. Abelard sat weakly on the bed, recalling everything from the past. His mood sank to a low point. He had clearly performed just as well as his brother in school, even better in some aspect. But due to his lack of eloquence and social skill, he wasn't favored at home. He was given endless farm work. When he got to junior high and stayed in the dormitory, he didn't have to work and finally had more time to study, resulting in rapid academic improvement. He ranked first in every subject. However, his parents used the excuse that they couldn't afford to send the children to school and that the family farm work needed someone to do it, forcing him to return home. Clearly, why was he the one who had to come back? He was unwilling to ask his mother. But her answer made no sense because he is the eldest son of the family. Your father and I will rely on him for our old age. He said he could also support them. But in the end, he was harshly rejected. It wasn't until several days into the third year of junior high that the principal found him, covered in mud, in a rice field. The principal took him home to speak with Clara and her husband. It's the third year now. In just one more year, he can take the college entrance exam. The school will waive his tuition. You just need to cover a portion of his living expenses and fees. This was the first time the school had encountered such a gifted student in all its years. Abelard's older brother was at the same middle school. He didn't pass the entrance exam for high school last year and had to repeat this year. Clara flatly refused, stating that she couldn't even manage the school fees. The second son, who spoke little but did everything in an orderly manner, seemed to have some method that often outperformed the adults, making him easy to deal with. Being someone who valued talent, went to the county overnight to seek connections and published a help letter in the newspaper. It was rare to have this opportunity, and they wrote 5 students' assistance requests together. That year, he received a sponsorship along with a letter. It amounted to $1,500, enough for him to finish his last year of middle school and all of high school. When he got to university, he encountered Professor Shen, who unconditionally admired him, encouraged him, and covered his tuition and living expenses, allowing him to devote himself entirely to studying and research, leading to his later achievements and job opportunities. He knew that Professor Shen was being slandered, but he felt powerless. Now, even his only daughter was being cared for well, and he felt guilty and remorseful. Abelard, come out here and take your brother to the infirmary, Clara shouted from the door. Abelard didn't move. After a while, he put the letter and withdrawal slip back into his bag. When the noise outside faded, he shouldered his bag and opened the door, seeing Clara and the old man sitting in the living room as if waiting specifically for him. Where do you think you're going? Your brother's medical fees are $5. Hurry up and settle it, Clara said with an unhappy expression. Abelard glanced at the two elderly people, his face expressionless. You to pack your things tomorrow and go back to the old home. Hearing this, Clara immediately exploded. What did you say? I will send your and Dad's pension back every month, Abelard added. The old man thought he had heard wrong. His usually taciturn son was actually going to chase them back to their old home? We raised you. Now that you've grown wings, you don't want to take care of us? Clara questioned loudly. I'm not neglecting you. I will send your pension on time, Abelard repeated. Clara was immediately unwilling. Your brother isn't married, and your oldest brother's child is in elementary school. $80 a month isn't enough. I have no obligation to support anyone else besides you and Dad. Or not leave, Clara declared defiantly. Abelard nodded. Okay. Then don't expect $80 from me anymore. With that, he shouldered his bag and walked out. Clara looked at Abelard's disappearing figure and immediately panicked. Old man. Is the second son serious? They knew Abelard's character very well. When he didn't care, he was easy to manage. He could be assigned the dirtiest and most laborious tasks, eat the least, and wouldn't show any resistance or dissatisfaction, and he would complete them excellently. But if he was serious, no one could stop him. The old man sighed. What if he is serious? After all, we are his parents. He's now a person of status. At worst, we can find his superior. Upon hearing this, Clara felt reassured. In the kitchen, Aline was cooking while a boss sat on the living room sofa, intently fiddling with the Rubik's Cube in his hand. He had used many steps to barely piece together two sides, and his little face was wrinkling up in frustration. Despite the fan blowing next to him, beads of sweat were forming beneath his nose. Do you need me to teach you? Upon hearing the familiar voice, Abbas quickly looked up, a glimmer of surprise flashing in his eyes. But it soon faded. He glanced furtively toward the kitchen but didn't say anything. Abelard sat down next to Abbas and looked up to see a children's educational program playing on the TV. At that moment, the power suddenly went out, plunging the room into darkness, and the fan stopped. From the kitchen came Aileen's voice. Abba, go outside and check if it's just our house that's out or if the whole courtyard is affected. The wiring in this house was old, and blown fuses were common occurrence. As Abbas was about to get up from the sofa, Abelard pressed him down. I'll go check. He pulled out a flashlight from his bag and began troubleshooting, checking the main power switch, fuses, and the circuit breaker, then moving on to the sockets and appliances. Abba, is it just our house that's out? After about 2 or 3 minutes, Aileen's voice came again. Abbas watched Abelard as he replied, Yeah. Then wait a moment. I'll go find Uncle Electrician to fix it. As soon as she finished speaking, the lights in the room turned back on. Fan began to rotate again, and the sound from the TV resumed. Abbas looked at Abelard in astonishment, unable to hide his admiration any longer. You're amazing. Abelard had heard countless compliments throughout his life, but his son's praise moved him a little. After all, he was someone who was used to pride. He simply nodded lightly and sat down again next to Abba. I have a more advanced way to play with the Rubik's Cube. Do you want to see? In the kitchen, the lights came back on. Aileen felt a bit strange. Abbas had just said that only their house was out. So how did it come back so quickly? She soaked the shredded potatoes in water, wiped her hands dry, and walked out of the kitchen toward the living room. Abba! Hearing her voice, Abbas quickly bounced away from Abelard, slipped off the sofa, and ran barefoot to Aileen's side, feeling a bit guilty as he said. The electricity was fixed by him, so he didn't want to do anything that would make his mother unhappy. At this moment, Abelard also put down the Rubik's Cube and turned to Eileen, saying, I just came to see Abba. Eileen smiled slightly at him. Have you eaten? No. Eileen looked at her anxious son and patted his head. Go on. Go play with Dad. Abbas was a sensitive child. He had picked up on her dissatisfaction with Abelard from the very beginning. If he didn't like Abelard, he certainly wouldn't care about him. Since he acknowledged Abbas and had paid child support, she had no reason to let her small feelings make it difficult for her child. The father and son exchanged the same surprised expressions upon hearing this, especially Abelard, whose eyes turned slightly red. After Eileen finished speaking, she turned and returned to the kitchen, continuing to stir-fry shredded potatoes and making a dish of stir-fried pork with green peppers. Usually, when it was just her and Abbas, she would only prepare 2 dishes, but since Abelard was here, she had to add another. She remembered how Abelard used to eat a lot whenever he came over for dinner with his dad, so she quickly made a dish of minced eggplant as well. About half an hour later, the meal was ready. As she brought the dishes into the living room, she heard Abbas exclaiming in amazement. What? It can be made like this. So good. She had never heard such admiration from her son before. Most of the time, he would say, You're so dumb. I don't want to play with him. Both father and son were focused, and by the time she set the dishes and rice on the table, they hadn't even noticed her presence. Abba, time to eat, Eileen gently called out. Only then did Abelard put down the Rubik's Cube, and Abbas obediently came over. The white table was wiped clean, with 3 dishes, 3 bowls of rice, and 3 pairs of chopsticks neatly arranged. The square table had each person sitting at one side. Eileen picked up her chopsticks and said, But Abbas then picked up his chopsticks and grabbed a helping of shredded potatoes. This was Abelard's first time eating food prepared by Eileen. The rice was fragrant and plump. The shredded potatoes were slightly sour and crisp. The eggplant was tender and sticky. The stir-fried pork with green peppers had just the right level of spice. Every dish was a delight to his taste buds. Eileen and Abbas had small appetites. After finishing a small bowl each, they both set their bowls down. Eileen watched the man across from her eat slowly. Yet he was extremely refined, just like when they used to have meals together at home. Abbas looked at him with wide eyes, curious about how his mom's cooking could taste so good. Feeling the gaze of the mother and son, Abelard hesitated, intending to get another bowl, but his hand involuntarily dropped. He had already eaten 2 bowls. Eileen added, Abelard politely replied, standing up to collect the bowl. Abbas chimed in. If we don't finish these dishes, they'll go to waste. Mom says eating leftovers isn't good for your health. Eileen was surprised by this comment. Her eyes flickered as she glanced at her son. Was he trying to persuade Abelard to stay for dinner? It would be such a waste. Abelard had no habit of wasting food. He sat back down and served himself another bowl of rice from the pot nearby. Worried that he might feel uncomfortable, Eileen stood up and said, I'll go check on the water. The water on the coal stove was already boiling. She covered the stove and poured herself a glass of water, sitting on the rattan chair beside the grape arbor, sipping while thinking. Just as she finished her tea, she saw Abelard coming out of the kitchen with a bowl and naturally walking over to wash the dishes. Eileen returned to the living room and saw Abbas playing with the Rubik's Cube, even creating some patterns she had never seen before. Looking quite orderly, Eileen sat down beside him. Do you like him a lot? Abbas, with his fair little fingers fiddling with the cube, blinked his big eyes at Eileen and whispered. I don't necessarily need it. Eileen chuckled. All right. If you like him, just interact with him however you want. If he treats Mom badly, I won't want him. That's a matter between your mom and him. You don't need to think about it so much. Besides, I received his child support, so you'll rely on him from now on. Eileen wanted Abbas to live a simple and happy life. After all, He was only a little over 3 years old. Abba's big eyes squinted with a smile. Okay. No wonder his mom's attitude had improved a lot. It turned out it was because his dad was providing child support. The mother and son chatted for a while. After Abelard finished washing the dishes, he came out of the kitchen, casually sweeping the yard again. When he entered the hall, his gaze fell on the sofa, where Eileen sat, one arm hugging her knees and the other propping up her chin, intently watching Abbas as he flipped the building blocks in his hands. Well, Abbas is really amazing. She had a serene and gentle expression, showing no signs of the grievances she had endured in the past. He pulled up a chair and sat down beside Eileen, sincerely stating, Eileen, I will take good care of you and Abbas from now on. Felt a lot of guilt and regret toward her, but the words got stuck in his throat. He didn't know where to start. He wanted to ask her why she hadn't returned his calls back then and let him know that Abbas was born. But given the circumstances, he cowled and bring himself to voice any accusations. She must have been desperate, probably even feeling hopeless about herself at that time. Eileen looked up at him, slightly surprised, but quickly understood. Just treat Abbas well. Abelard fell silent. She hadn't accepted him. Yeah, after everything that had happened, who could accept it all at once? He didn't blame her. Abelard picked up the bag on the sofa and said to Eileen, I'll come to see Abbas again tomorrow. Okay? After Abelard left, Eileen sat on the sofa in a day. Did he just say he would take good care of them from now on? For years of neglect, not even knowing Abbas existed, and now suddenly changing his attitude because of Abbas? That would be fine. If he really could take good care of Abbas, she could leave him with Abelard when she went to Penkying in the future. The next morning, Eileen took Abbas to buy groceries. At the market, they bought 2 zucchini, half a duck, and a stalk of asparagus. Remembering that Abelard was coming, she also bought 10 eggs and 2 bundles of green vegetable. When they got home, she put the duck meat and eggs in the fridge. The other dishes were placed in the vegetable basket. And then Eileen said to Abbas, Mommy needs to work for a while now. You go play in the living room by yourself. Okay, Abbas replied obediently. Blinking his big eyes, Eileen went into the room and closed the door. Abbas sat on the living room sofa, flipping through the comic book Uncle Dave had brought him, with the robot his dad had given him sitting beside him. Abbas looked up and saw Colby at the door, holding a few candies that his dad had given him that day. Abbas cowed at be bothered and lowered his head to continue reading. Colby came in. I called you out to play. What are you daydreaming about? Abbas frowned, not wanting to disturb his mom while she was working. I'm not playing. You go out. Colby looked at the robot next to him, wanting to reach for it, but Abbas pushed his hand away. What are you doing? I just wanted to take a look. How about I trade you my white rabbit for it? Abbas put down his book and clutched the robot tightly. No trade. I'm waiting for Dad to come back in the evening to play with him. He was an illegitimate child. He had a dad, and his dad was very smart and could do anything. Abbas didn't know why. He felt a strong urge to show off his dad in front of Colby. Colby thought of that tall and handsome uncle and, with a twinkle in his eye, asked, Does your dad like you? Abbas lifted his chin and replied in an undeniable little voice. Of course, Colby felt that Abbas was bragging. If your dad liked you, he would have come back to recognize you a long time ago. Upon hearing this, Abba's little face instantly turned unhappy, but he argued back. That's not true. It's because he's busy with work. He came to spend time with me yesterday, and he'll come back tonight. He'll come every day from now on. Colby pouted. I don't believe it. Abbas didn't want to deal with Colby anymore. If you don't believe it, fine. I'm going to read. You can go back. Colby made a funny face at Abbas. What does it matter if you have a dad? You still have no friends. Abbas didn't care. I don't need friends. After the previous lesson, Colby didn't dare to snatch Abbas' things again. He looked at the robot clutched tightly in Abbas's hands, feeling a bit reluctant to leave. Once Colby was out of the room, Abbas let out a sigh of relief. After Eileen finished working, she came out of the room and saw Abbas happily fiddling with the robot in his hand. To her surprise, the robot could walk and talk. Eileen was curious and walked closer to take a look. Abbas immediately held up the robot to show Eileen. Look, this robot can actually take battery. Eileen asked with curiosity. Did you install it? Abbas blinked his big eyes and nodded. Then, didn't he teach you yesterday? Eileen sounded surprised, as if she had just discovered that. Who? Your dad? Eileen still felt a bit uneasy saying those 3 words. Perhaps because she was used to it. Abbas laughed. He didn't talk to us when he put the robot on the table. Eileen felt a bad premonition. Then where did your batteries come from? Abbas pointed to the little radio on the table. I took them out from the little radio that Uncle Dave sent. He quickly added. It's not broken. I put it all back together. After playing, they'll put it back. Eileen knew her son loved to take things apart and put them back together. She nodded. Make sure to put it back later. Mommy wants to listen to the radio. Abbas pouted, trying to bargain. Can I do it tomorrow? Why? Eileen raised her eyebrows. Abbas whispered. When Dad comes tonight, I want to ask him if there are any other ways to play with this robot. Eileen smiled. She really didn't expect that her son, who had been resistant yesterday, would fully accept it today and even start to look forward to it. She didn't think much of it and went to the kitchen to cook. After lunch, Abbas took a nap and then went to the backyard to check on the grapevines. Meanwhile, Eileen sat on a bamboo chair in the backyard with a book, watching her son. At that moment, Colby's mom, Faye, came over with a small bamboo basket. She was smiling, completely losing her previous arrogance, and Colby was following behind her. Eileen, there was a misunderstanding a few days ago. My mother-in-law brought some eggs from the countryside yesterday to give to Abbas to help him recover, Faith said sweetly, placing the bamboo basket on the table. Abbas didn't move. Eileen put down her book, walked over, picked up the small bamboo basket Faith had just placed on the table, and handed it back to Faith. Faye, since Colby admitted it in front of everyone that day, I'll consider that he made a mistake. You can take these eggs, but Faith didn't take it. Smiling. Are you still angry? It's normal for kids to fight and play. We're old neighbors, so there's no need to be so calculative. Eileen also smiled. With our family situation now, I can't really help much. They have been neighbors for many years, and Eileen knew exactly what kind of person Faith was. Realizing her intentions had been guessed, Faith felt a bit embarrassed and chuckled. Well, it's not a big deal. Just a word from engineer Abelard. Colby's dad worked under Abelard. And today Colby came back saying that Abba's dad treated him very well and had been coming to play with him lately. That's what sparked Faith's idea. Eileen knew this and shoved the basket into Faith's hand. Faye, I can't help you with this. Faith frowned. Eileen, about what happened a few days ago. Don't take it to heart. What do you want Faith to do to make you feel satisfied? Eileen kept a gentle smile on her face but showed no emotion in her eyes. No need. Just treat it like before. Faith didn't accept it either and took a step back. Looking around, there was no denying it. Life was quite good. Which family in the small courtyard had a refrigerator? A pressure cooker? She smiled again and said, Colby just follows those people around and talks nonsense. If Abelard really didn't recognize a boss, he wouldn't have sent his salary all these years to support you too. Eileen noticed Faith's eyes darting around and guessed what she was thinking. She neither denied nor admitted it, saying, I'm going to make dinner. If you don't want me to send the eggs over again, you can just take them yourself. Faith's expression darkened slightly as she replied, Then I'll take Colby over first. If you need any help, just call me from next door. With that, she left. Eileen called out to Abbas. Mom is cooking. Do you want to come help or watch the grapes? Abbas ignored her, and Eileen knew her son wanted to continue watching the grapes. She turned and went to the kitchen to cook. After steaming the rice and washing and cutting the vegetable, so they should be arriving soon. Meanwhile, Abbas had already settled on the living room sofa waiting. Once Eileen finished cooking and set the table, she saw Abbas hugging the robot. Glancing occasionally at the door, Eileen called, Abba, come eat. Abbas turned around with a hint of disappointment, placed the robot on the sofa, and sat down at the table, looking somewhat dispirited. All right, But maybe he has something to do. Let's eat. Eileen didn't feel too disappointed, but seeing her son's expression made her a little resentful. Abbas picked up his chopsticks and quietly chewed his food. Eileen served him a piece of duck, gently coaxing him. This will help you grow tall. Abbas looked at Eileen and asked, "Ma, why aren't you sad?" Eileen smiled and replied, "Mom will only be sad if Abbas is unhappy." Abbas seemed to understand, wanting to keep his mom from being sad, and quickly dug into his rice. After dinner, Abbas obediently returned to the sofa, no longer taking the robot, but instead focused on the TV while Eileen cleared the dishes and washed them in the kitchen. Just then, Colby passed by Abba's door, looking around before calling out, "Abba, is your dad here?" Abbas frowned, feeling annoyed, and ignored him, not hearing a response. Colby walked in and, seeing Abbas sitting alone on the sofa watching TV, his gaze shifted and landed on the robot that Abbas had tossed aside. His eyes lit up, and he said, "Abba, since your dad isn't playing with you, I'll play with you." Seeing Colby approaching the robot, Abbas quickly snatched it up and glared at him. "No," Colby pouted. "Why are you being so stingy? Your dad isn't here." "What's wrong with me playing with it a bit?" Mentioning that his dad was there made Abbas' expression darken, and he remained silent. At that moment, a loud voice rang out, "Colby, Colby." Colby replied loudly, "I'm at Abba's house." Soon after, a sturdy middle-aged man ran in, greeted Abbas, and Abbas returned the greeting, saying hello, "Uncle." Dominic glanced at Colby and gently said, "Dad has been calling you for a while. Why didn't you respond?" Colby didn't even look at Dominic. "Didn't I respond? I've been looking for you for a long time. Didn't we agree to go swimming together? So, do you still want to go with Dad?" Dominic asked with a smile. Colby jumped up excitedly at the mention of swimming, saying, "Yeah, Dad really keeps his word. He's actually going to take me swimming." After saying this, he turned to Abbas and asked, "Abba, do you want to go?" Abbas shook his head. "I don't like swimming." Colby took Dominic's hand and headed out. As they reached the door, Abbas sneakily glanced at the duo's retreating figures. After walking a short distance, Dominic asked Colby, "Is Abba's dad not coming today?" Colby nodded. "But I didn't fight with the boss today. Do you think I did the right thing?" Dominic patted his son's head. "Yeah. Great. It would be even better if you could become friends." Colby pouted. "He's no fun at all. I don't want to play with him." Dominic chuckled. "Then don't play with him. Let's go swimming." Abelard's attitude towards the mother and son was quite intriguing. Though one couldn't discern much from just a day or two, Dominic thought to himself. 2 hours earlier, Abelard was called into the office by his supervisor. "Darnell, Abelard, how could you resort to violence against your family? Have you thought about what your current status is?" Abelard looked at his watch and asked, "Are you done?" Darnell, trying to reason with him, said, "You're a model employee in our unit. You can't have any lapses in your conduct or morals. I nominated you for the exemplary employee list this month. What do you want me to do?" Abelard asked anxiously. Darnell suggested, "Apologize to your parents and brother, and let this matter rest." After a moment of contemplation, Abelard replied, "Then you can nominate someone else." Darnell stood up in anger. "Yeah." Abelard also stood up. "My son is still waiting for me. We can discuss this tomorrow." Darnell pinched the bridge of his nose. Abelard was the only one who dared speak to him like that. He wanted to assert his authority as a leader. He understood Abelard's nature well. He couldn't even find a substitute to reprimand. While Abelard made his work easy for him, he made his life difficult whenever personal issues arose. Darnell pulled Abelard back down into his seat, saying, "If we don't resolve this issue, neither of us will leave work today." He had no choice but to play hardball. Abelard sighed. Is there any other way besides apologizing? He was unwilling to resolve the issue, but he felt he hadn't done anything wrong, and he didn't agree with this approach. Darnell replied, "Can't you not be in such a hurry to send your parents back? If this escalates, there'll be a big deal. Everyone is watching, and the organization values you. What about my wife and child?" Abelard felt that his parents were in the wrong. so they should go back. Upon hearing this, Darnell breathed a sigh of relief. If there were problems, it meant there was room for negotiation. He smiled amiably. Aren't your wife and child doing well right now? If they're going to stay at her parents' house, then why did I marry her? Darnell was practically exasperated. We're in a new society now. There aren't so many formalities. If you really want to improve your relationship with your wife and son, why don't you just move over there? Abelard furrowed his brow. Thinking it over, he realized that since his son had taken the surname Shen, it wouldn't be impossible for him to move there. I can move over, but my parents still need to go back. Okay? Okay? We'll talk about this later, until we find a proper solution. Don't escalate things further. Darnell also had opinions about Abelard's parent, who sends away their daughter-in-law without asking their son, especially when she's pregnant, but the public doesn't think that way. After all, everyone already has preconceived notions about Eileen, and with filial piety being paramount, he didn't dare easily challenge public opinion. It's all your fault. Darnell pointed the finger at Abelard again. If you had told your parents about the marriage certificate sooner, she wouldn't have been wrong. It's a miracle she'd even want to answer your calls or write back to you after this. Abelard fell silent. After a moment, he glanced at his watch. I really have to go. Otherwise, I'll miss the bus. So you're agreeing? While packing his things, Abelard asked. Agreeing to what? Right now. You can't just force your parents back. Got it. Abelard finished packing and left. As soon as he arrived at the office building of the Research Institute, he saw Maggie, seeing the man hurriedly coming down from upstairs. She knew he was anxious to get back. Abelard. She took a couple of steps forward, revealing a gentle smile. Abelard nodded, casually acknowledging her. Off work? He didn't intend to stop walking. The man was tall and quick, his anxious expression clear on his handsome face. Maggie hurried after him. Abelard, can you help me with something? I don't have time right now. You haven't even heard what it is yet. Maggie was used to Abelard's attitude. He spoke this way even to his superiors. So she didn't mind. I'm busy with everything. I'm not interested in things I can't do. Abelard continued walking. Maggie was panting as she chased after him. Baker is in the hospital. He has a rib injury. His mom is about to cry. She just fainted and was sent to the infirmary by his dad. Baker needs someone to sign for his transfer. Maggie said it all in one breath. Abelard finally stopped and quickly turned around, heading toward the family compound. Upon arriving, he went straight to the infirmary and saw Baker lying on the bed getting an IV, with Clara weakly sitting beside him. Upon seeing Abelard, Clara immediately cried out and grabbed his arm. Abelard glanced at Baker lying in the hospital bed, pried Clara's hand away, and stopped in front of the nurse's desk. Does Baker need to be transferred? The nurse looked up and was briefly captivated by Abelard's appearance. He requested the transfer himself, saying he has abdominal pain. We can't find anything here, so it's better to go to the People's Hospital for an X-ray. Abelard nodded. Thank you. What's wrong with my mom? Just as the nurse was about to speak, she noticed Clara behind Abelard. The nurse's face showed some hesitation. She's just a bit uncomfortable. Since they were all in the same family compound, the usually friendly Aunt Keon had trouble ignoring her request and ended up telling a little white lie. Abelard somewhat understood. Turning to Baker, I heard you hurt your ribs. Do you want to check? Upon seeing that, Baker quickly crossed his arms in a protective manner. What are you doing? Abelard's hand froze in mid-air, a smile playing on his lips. I'm just checking to see how serious it is. Although he was smiling warmly, Baker felt a chill run down his spine, as if Abelard would break his ribs if he touched him. When he was little, if he went out to work, whether chopping wood or cutting grass for the pigs, if he encountered kids from the same village alone, most of the time his things would be taken. But as long as Abelard was around, those kids would instinctively keep their distance. At that time, he wondered how this quiet brother could be so frightening. Now he truly understood. Baker shifted slightly. I just said it feels like a broken rib. I didn't say it actually is, but it feels better now. Abelard's thin lips curved up slightly, his long eyelashes lowering. He asked with a half smile, how much better? With this demeanor, Anyone could see Abelard was being a caring big brother. But Maggie knew he was getting angry. Baker, if there's nothing wrong, don't cause a fuss here. Just settle the bill and go home. You don't want your brother to worry. Maggie kindly reminded him. Abelard turned around and walked back to the nurse. Since my mom isn't feeling well, let's have her come in for an IV. The nurse smiled. It's not that serious. She fainted. How can it not be serious? Or are you saying you can't find anything again? Abelard lightly tapped the table, deep in thought. The nurse didn't know how to respond at the moment. Clara spoke up. Abelard, this is an old problem for Mom. Don't fuss. She'll be fine. Let's just go home. Abelard, being intelligent, would let them fool him. He paid for Baker's medical expenses and then said, That's not okay. Since I'm here, I'll go to the People's Hospital. He stepped forward to help Clara up and looked at Baker. Do you want to go? Baker quickly shook his head. Why should he go through the trouble if he was sick? I'd rather sleep at home. No, not going. Then you won't accompany Mom to take a look? No. Let's Sister Maggie go with her. Baker quickly said. Abelard nodded and said to Maggie, Then it'll trouble you. After all, they got along so well and liked to be together, so he would support them. Maggie thought about Abelard going, although it would be tiring. Clara felt a bit stuck in her situation. She just wanted Abelard to cough up a little more money. After just receiving a salary of 150 yuan, she only got back 80 yuan. And she didn't know if the rest was with him or if he had given it to that woman. After filing a complaint today, if she didn't show a bit of weakness, how could he be willing to part with the money? Her eldest son was still waiting for this money to transfer to his son. Abelard took a few steps and saw Clara standing still, then turned back and said, Let's go. If we wait any longer, there won't be any buses. Maggie nudged Clara's arm insistently, and together they followed Abelard to the bus stop. When they arrived at the People's Hospital, Clara realized just how big the hospital was. Suddenly feeling a bit scared, she asked Maggie quietly, What if the doctor finds out I'm not really sick? If that happened, Abelard certainly wouldn't fall for her act again. Maggie leaned in and whispered, It's fine. Just insist that you don't feel well. If they say, just claim they couldn't find anything. Clara took a few steps and suddenly remembered that her original intention for pretending to be sick was this. Why was Maggie so eager to help? When she looked up, she saw Maggie gazing dreamily at Abelard's back. But Clara instantly felt uncomfortable. It seemed Maggie was using her to get some alone time with Abelard. All three of Abelard's sons had taken after him and were good-looking, especially the second son, who had outstanding demeanor and appearance. In academic terms, he was like a student surpassing his teacher. Yet, his temper was hard to figure out. He wasn't as considerate and gentle as the eldest, nor was he as sweet and flattering as the youngest. No matter how she tried to train him, it never worked. While she was lost in thought, Abelard led Clara to the internal medicine clinic. After a quick examination, the doctor declared there were no issues. Abelard suggested, How about a blood test? Hearing this, Clara turned pale. The doctor said, Blood tests require fasting. So, don't eat anything and come early tomorrow. Abelard appeared quite concerned, saying, Can we arrange for a hospital room for her to stay and be observed? What? A hospital stay? Maggie turned completely pale. Clara felt uncertain too. After all, it was her first time at such a large hospital. Unable to hold back, she asked Abelard, What about you? Abelard smiled. I just remembered. I probably don't have enough money on me. I'll go back to get some, so I'll leave first. Maggie stood frozen as she watched Abelard's retreating figure. Clara's expression was also grim. The doctor kindly asked Clara, Is this your son? Clara nodded numbly. He looks great and is so filial. I've seen many patients, and usually, they wouldn't admit someone unless it was serious, though the doctor said that. Clara still felt something was off. The doctor wrote up a hospital admission form and instructed the nurse to take Clara to a ward. Abelard stepped out of the hospital, checked his watch, and saw it was already 10:30 p.m. He had missed the last bus. He hailed a taxi and went directly to Alien's neighborhood. It was pitch dark except for the moonlight overhead. Abelard didn't even know why he felt the need to visit at this hour. His feet unconsciously lead him to the Shen family store, only to find Dalian's room lit up. A slender shadow was cast against the window, sometimes pausing to think with a pen in hand, and at other time, bending over the desk to write or draw something. Was she still awake at this late hour? Abelard stared at that silhouette, wondering what she was doing. He remembered the professor mentioning Eileen with a sense of regret, lamenting that she hadn't inherited any academic talent, always restless and struggling in her studies, failing to get into college and instead pursuing impractical art alongside friends. However, he didn't think that way. Everyone had their own strengths. He recalled her painting, which had a certain spirit to them. He believed he could never create such imaginative imagery in his lifetime. Just as he was lost in thought, he suddenly heard a series of sharp coughs coming from the room. Abelard's heart skipped a beat, and he was about to knock on the door to check what was happening. But then the light in the room went out. Abelard stood there for a moment,